Thanks for joining me as we conclude this series on the prophetic. We've been talking about prophets for the last several sessions, and today we want to conclude this whole series and really talk about how prophets are designed to bless the local church today. Before we go any further, as I always mention, please like, subscribe, and share. That always helps this ministry to expand and also gets you fresh content. When we're talking about prophets and what their purpose is in the local church, now we're not talking about those that are specifically functioning within the local church as the life gift of prophecy does, but we're talking about prophets, those who are vocational. The Ephesians 4 gifts of Jesus Christ: apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. Each of those 5 ministries, when they are functioning as one of Jesus's gifts, are designed to be extra local, meaning that they have influence beyond their own local congregation. They don't have to be extra local, but they have the ability to. For example, if someone is identified as a pastor, you don't necessarily think of that person as only being a pastor within their local congregation. If they're a pastor, they can go to another church. If they preach, they will be received and accepted and welcomed and respected as a pastor, as they should be. It's exactly the same for those who are called to be teachers. There are those who are called to specifically teach inside the local church, but there are those who have callings to teach outside the local church. I am such a human being. God has given me a gift of teaching that extends beyond my congregation. And that's perfectly fine. Wherever I go, if I teach, people will know that that gift is also for them. It's not simply for my local church. That applies to evangelists. Of course, evangelists, we naturally understand, are functioning outside of the context of a local church. Prophets and apostles, those who are vocationally gifted, by nature will function outside of the local church. Now, it doesn't mean that they have to go from church to church. They're not required to do that. You can have a church where there are local prophets that stay the majority of the time in those congregations. That's perfectly fine. Nothing wrong with that. But prophets and apostles particularly, and evangelists, will be those who tend to travel outside of the local church. As a foundation, we've been talking about this dynamic of submission, and we've been talking about this dynamic of connection with the local pastors and the local authorities. I've spent a lot of time emphasizing that because it's really important that we understand that prophets and apostles are not extra local to the point that they can just do whatever they want and go wherever they want. There is a caveat to that I need you to understand. If God has called somebody to be a prophet and an apostle, and it is extra local, the authority that they are under is, of course, different than the authority of a local church. What do I mean by that? Well, a pastor of a local church is given authority for that which is within the realm or the sphere that God has given him. They are there to function within that local church. If a prophet is invited to come and share in that local church while he or she is underneath the authority of that local church, they are subject to that pastor and that leadership. Anything they do, anything they say is entirely accountable to that local ministry. However, that prophet who travels from congregation to congregation is not necessarily subject to that leadership when they go elsewhere. And this is a problem for some to understand, but prophets and apostles are accountable to whatever structures or wherever they are ministering at that time. A number of years ago, I was in a congregation where I ministered there for a period of time, and then God called me to do some other things. The local pastor at that time, we had a discussion about this, but they felt that I was not called to do ministry outside of the local church, that I wasn't called to do the things that I felt like God was calling me to do. And so he demanded that I submit my ministry underneath his authority. And I refused. And that caused a rift. Maybe that rift even exists still today. You see, as someone who is called to do ministry outside of the local church, I am not subject to that local church pastor in terms of my overall ministry. The gift of teaching is not something that's subject to a local church pastor unless it's ministering in that congregation. In other words, if it's an extra local ministry, it is not subject to the authority of a local church unless that particular pastor or particular ministry wants to be. This sounds a little bit confusing, but I want to kind of present it in a way that you'll understand. Prophetic ministry is extra local. That means that it does minister outside of a local church and can minister to other congregations when invited. Apostles are precisely the same way. It would make a whole lot of sense for an apostle, like Paul, for example, that every time he was going to minister in Philippi, he ran back to Antioch and said, "What should I do now? Is this okay with you?" He didn't do that because his ministry was not underneath the Antioch leadership. It was while he was there. Whenever he went back there, he subjected himself to their authority and did whatever they asked him to do, and he functioned gladly underneath their authority. But he didn't check with them and he didn't coordinate with them every time he did something outside of the context of that local church. Apostles, prophets, evangelists, particularly, don't do that. They're not required by God to do that. However, when they're involved in that local church, absolutely, they are under the authority of that. We all know the name Billy Graham, who passed away, some years ago, but during the last century, his ministry was all over the world. He reached millions of people with the gospel. But he didn't check back with his local church and say, "Is this okay if I go over here? Is this okay? Should I go over there?" He didn't subject his ministry to the authority of a local church. So I hope that that's clear. That's not my purpose in sharing today, but I wanted to make that clear. Prophets do minister outside a local church. If they're invited into another congregation, they function in prophecy. They can be a real blessing to a local congregation. If they're proven prophets, they can really have an influence in that church and they can have a blessing to that church. I shared with you a number of videos ago how a prophet named Leon Price came to our congregation back in 1991, a lot of years ago. And his ministry ended up being a tremendous blessing to me. I formed a friendship with him, and over a number of years, he not only ministered in my congregation, but I opened up the opportunity for him to minister in many congregations in my regional area. He was a blessing to every church that I brought him to. So he had a huge impact on our region because I opened the doors for him and I made it available. But I didn't say, "Leon, you got to check with me every time you prophesy." See, I understood that his ministry was apart from our local church. However, when he was in our local church, he subjected himself to us. Every prophet can be a real blessing, especially if they're functioning in the gift that God has given them. They are designed by God to bring a fresh word, a fresh encouragement, a fresh strengthening. As I've mentioned repeatedly throughout this series, all these words need to be judged and accountable, but prophets can be a tremendous blessing to congregations when they function correctly. We see in the New Testament that prophets and apostles would travel together. We see prophets like Agabus traveling in teams. We see this going on. It was a normal practice in the New Testament church. And we've yet to discover how really these prophetic ministries can enhance and bless local churches today. They are designed by God to do that. We need the prophetic ministry more than ever. We need legitimate prophetic ministry. And because we've had a terrible attitude about prophetic ministry, we've ended up with a lot of nonsense. And I think that it's high time we clean up the nonsense without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I know this is not everything that you can find out about the prophetic ministry. I wish that I could share with you so much more about this, but I believe that it's time to close this particular series to give you kind of an understanding of that. It is my intention to write a book about this subject, and if I do, then if you'll like and subscribe, then I'll be able to tell you about it. I do encourage you to do that, though, and especially in these next couple of weeks. I'm going to be going to Zimbabwe, and if you'd like to be a part of that, I'm going to be sharing live on YouTube in the next couple of weeks, and more about that ministry you can find out at the YouTube channel. I've got some videos there about our ministry there. We're going to be going to Zimbabwe, and we're building wells over there, so you can be part of that if you'd like to be. But thank you for being a part of this series. I hope that I've been able to answer some of the questions you have about prophetic ministry. The prophet's ministry is one that's sort of like the, again, equivalent to pastors and teachers and evangelists. They're on that same par. They have the same accountability structures that all of those do. They have the same authorities that all of those do. They have the same accountabilities that all of those do. But we're going to need to start opening our heart to more of what prophetic ministry has to offer. And Lord willing, I'm going to also begin a series on apostolic ministry because I think that's another misunderstood area. And perhaps we'll do that next week. The Lord bless you and thank you for being part of this series. Take care. Hey, before you go, can you please leave me a comment, like, and subscribe? I would greatly appreciate it.